Yeah.
This is the final word story time, 217. It's the 27th of February. I'm Adam Collins. I'm in London where it's freezing cold, which is why I'm wearing something of a puffer jacket, having dropped the girls off from school. Jeff, by contrast, in Melbourne in a T-shirt where at the end of February it tends to be at its hottest. Therefore, climate change must not exist. Hello to you.
It's not real. That's not a puffer jacket. That's like woolly. That looks like you skinned a Muppet to wear that jacket. It looks like you found Fozzie Bear in an alleyway somewhere and just throat to nuts, just opened him up and took the skin. That's what it looks like.
It was a nice Christmas gift from Rach on the very rare. It's very unusual that I would be, as you know, Jeff, in London during Christmas, and we were before Peggy's birth, so she bought this for me for that winter, and it's getting plenty of use at the moment. So there we go. So show number 217. I've not prepared anything, but I can tell you that dusty old bastard George Wood was capped 217, and I look forward to telling his story at some point. He was born in 1893, so he's right in our sweet spot there, and he played his test matches in 1924 against South Africa when England's selection was at its zaniest. So I'm tipping that there is a story to tell about George Wood at some point, who played for Hampshire by the looks of things. Cambridge University and Kent. So that classic combination of a nice university. That's right. The route that was taken by many cricketers, an Oxbridge University followed by a very to-do county in that.
I bet he captained England.
Yeah, in his 3 test matches.
Played 2 tests, captained 1.
Well, his numbers aren't crash hot. Three matches, didn't get a bowl. And made 7 runs at an average of 3.5. So it wasn't
sounds like an England captain's career to me.
And how about this? His first class career shithouse as well. First class, 101 matches, 2,700 runs, an average of 19.9, 1 century and 10 50s, and he didn't bowl. So I don't know how the fuck he's ended up playing for England, but I can guess. But anyway, so that's the show.
And Kent. That's how.
Yeah, that's right. It's a little bit of its time. So 217th story time that we are making today. Last week was episode 216. And Jeff, I lament not communicating with you before the show because I read on Cricket et al. A Gideon piece that last Thursday, so just before you recorded your episode with Barat last week, marked a century since the test debut of one Clarry Grimmett, who, of course, took 216 test wickets, which you were remarking upon last week. Took 5 for 45 and 6 for 37 on his test debut in early 1925 against England. Went on to take the record number of test wickets. And yes, as I'm sort of teased on the weekly show, I'll tell you more about Clarry Grimmett when doing an episode about the 1926 Ashes, which will come out probably a few days after the Champions Trophy.
Okay, that's curious. That's very curious. I don't even know what that's about, but
I may as well tell you. It's a book club. Stephen Brinkley's written this amazing book about the 26 Ashes, which I've been totally immersed in, and I'm like, I must get him on the show. So we will do that at some point soon.
It's poor from me. I should have picked up the Clarry anniversary, a century of CV Grimmett. I should have put his kit on. I should have put his jumper on when I recorded 216. In retrospect, I've got it in the next room. So that was a mistake. That was an oversight from me. But 216, it happened. It was nice that we've got this far.
And working backwards, Jeff, we've got one here from Storytime 215 as well, which was from Luke Ashbury, who was corresponding with you specifically, having done the answer on Godalming, which
Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar. So, Jeff, you can take it away there.
Sure. Yep. Pleasantly surprised, says Luke, to hear a brief mention of my small local club, Sheen Park CC, who I assume Julius Caesar played against. I must have mentioned them. Our first 11...
I mentioned them. I went through it and worked out all the games that he played in, as in all of the games that didn't quite make sense in relation to his career, and one of them was against Sheen Park. I'm like, hang on a sec, where did they play? No, sorry, it wasn't that. It was that. It wasn't that at all. It was last year, the last game that Godalming played in 2024. Was against Sheen Park. What division is it in? How are they playing against each other? And that's why we've got this correspondence.
Well, they've been bought out by Mr. Sheen, who with the shiny head, who's surreptitiously buying players for his club and not letting anybody know who's footed the bill. Yeah, apparently Godalming is how you pronounce it because it's England and you have to do things difficultly. Luke says they're playing in the Surrey Fullers Premier League, effectively Tier 6 of the Surrey League, feeding into Surrey Championship Div 5. the big one, the grudge match, centenary year for them as well in 2023. Despite being surrounded by bigger clubs with larger resources, we continue to punch above our collective weight. Famous alumni include Tom Hardy and Mark Ramprakash, who was hung up on when he rang up looking for some match practice. Initially, the first 11 captain went, "Yeah, whatever, mate."
I love this.
Put the phone down.
I love this little anecdote here about how they went on a tour to the Caribbean in the 1990s, and Ramps joined them on it. Remembering that Ramps is probably the most productive county championship cricketer of the last 40 years, along with Graham Hick. So the captain hangs up on him, saying he wanted some pre-season practice, and then Ramps went on to top score in that tour when they played against, including Gordon Greenwich, who comes up later in this show. It won't surprise you to learn, Jeff. And the other thing here...
But we always said, there was always a thing about Ramprakash, wasn't it? He could do it for Sheen Park CC, but he couldn't do it for England. Wasn't that what they used to say? Indeed.
Hey, just on Sheen Park, this another thing that you won't be surprised to learn, Jeff, is I saw Luke's email. I'm like, that's interesting. A club in Surrey. Oh, Oval Dream Boys. We're not that far away from that part of the world. I had a fixture blank in our list for the last day of the season. I really want to play a game on the last weekend of September. I invited Luke to host that game, and he said, "Yep, we will." So we're going down to Sheen Park to play on the 27th of September to end our Oval Dream Boys season. So I've made this work for us.
Very good.
And he did want me to say, he wanted me to say that if you're looking for a club in Surrey, to get in touch because they're recruiting players ahead of this season. So Luke, who's clearly a lovely bloke, doing great things there at Sheen Park CC. Look forward to meeting him later in 2025.
Yep. Robran Koch wrote in to say that Bharat's discussion of lions and kangaroos didn't reference his own city's great coat of arms. So this is implying that the coat of arms of Mumbai contains a lion and a kangaroo, does it? I can't say I've ever seen it. I mean, I've been there, but no, I didn't ask anybody to whip out the coat of arms. I might have to look this up now and see if this is true or not. Why would there be a kangaroo on there?
This is beyond me. I like that Tubes added some special comments on this as well, that there was this like rugby league Ashes, Great British Lions versus Kangaroos, and Tubes is like, this is broadly correct. So this is, Tubes being a rugby league expert on the show.
That is true. Lions did meet kangaroos, and I'd neglected to mention in talking about Roo-based teams that the Australian Rugby League team are the Kangaroos, but I think that's consistent with our approach to that code on this program. I'm looking at a Mumbai crest, and I can't see any kangaroos on it. I can see some pretty badly drawn lions, maybe a tiger and a lion. No kangaroos.
One of our favourite long-term supporters who got us onto Discord way back when, is Anna Forsyth. And she, during the week, accidentally brought a bloke by the name of Dave Ayres to my attention. This is ice hockey, because that's Anna's other sport, but this is insanely storytime areas. This is 5 years to the day where a chap called Dave Ayres made his one NHL appearance. So the best way I can explain this is that there's a thing in ice hockey called the emergency backup goalie. So it's not your third string keeper, because your third string keeper plays in the minor leagues. So what you need is one person who's kind of around the club who, in a pinch, could theoretically be your E-bug, your emergency backup goalie. Right. And this chap, Dave Ayres, was a guy who rode the thing on the ice that makes the ice, I guess, flat enough for it to be used for ice hockey, something like that.
Yeah, it's the ice flattener. I'm sure that's what it's called. The roller, the heavy roller for the ice.
So he was the heavier roller guy for the team in question. And then what happened was the Oppo who rocked up had their goalie and their number two goalie both get injured in the same game. And Dave Ayres came in to play as the E-bug for the Oppo, and they won the game 6-4. So he came on and he conceded 2 goals, but then didn't concede any further goals. And his story is such a remarkable one. Like he's literally, it's like Nathan Lyon energy, but, getting to play a test match
mid-game.
But mid-game kind of thing.
Like he's come out to repaint the lines during the tea break, and they're like, by the way, you're batting.
You're in the game. And James Corden went on to, I guess, buy the movie rights or something, and Disney were going to make a movie about this guy. But I just thought I'd note that for anyone. I mean, there's a bit of ice hockey cricket crossover on our Discord, which is largely driven by Anna.
Goldberg!
Yeah, Mighty Ducks especially. So I just thought that was a nice thing to mention off the top. And then one more from last week, Jeff. I'm going to leave this one to you. This is from Storytime 216 and an answer you were giving initially about Matthew Sinclair and how this cascaded, and I love where this ended.
Yeah, this is Andy T writing in saying that my I don't know, speculative solution to the clue that it involved Matthew Sinclair trying to break a league record in Yorkshire is probably less likely, given the clue of Bring It On Skippy, to it being a reference to the 12th Man with the Ian Chappell impersonation when he's talking about the Beatles and he's talking about New Zealand and he's talking about Stephen Fleming, some of which may come up later on the show today. And he says they appear to be saying, "Bring it on, Skippy." I mean, that could be it. He says he doesn't know if there's a specific number from the match that fits the pledge of 356. It was 3560. But there is a 12th man bit where Australia made 3 for 560.
It's definitely
Sri Lanka.
It's got to be. It's got to be that. I reckon that is the. I mean, that's my sweet spot in terms of final dig out of the 12th man body of work. But yes, that biggest hit since the Beatles when Ian Chappell's trying to. Change his because what the whole conceit of it is that Richie Benaud is going to retire. He's indicated that he wishes to retire, which he announces when meeting with the boss of Channel 9 over a schooner of Drambuie. I still do that all the time with a mate of mine, Harry. Should we get a couple of schooners to Drambuie? And then Hansi Cronje.
It's hard to get through. I'll tell you what, it's very thick, Drambuie. You mix it with whiskey, it's called a rusty nail. That's a decent drink, but...
Well, we did it at that Visit Victoria function that you and I did a couple of years ago. Harry and I went to the bar and requested whether they might make us up a schooner of Drambuie. They weren't so keen. They weren't so keen.
Yeah.
But that was fine. But yeah, that whole sequence where there's some quite off color, not off color because it's funny. And obviously the tragedy of Cronje's passing wasn't to be known. But this was the Christmas of 2001. I was living in the States as an exchange student, and my parents sent me a care package, including that CD. So I wore it out as you do at that age. And the Cronje stuff about he can book his ticket to book his ticket. And would you like a bet on it? I have a fucking gorilla on it. And then you fucking softcock and all this with Tansy trying to coerce the Channel 9 commentary team into having a punt with him on the games in front of him. Little did we know that in real life, Cronje would die about a month later in a plane crash. Anyway, that's one of those things. And
I would rather talk about Matthew Sinclair in Yorkshire. Generally, I think I've got more to say on that than on the 12th man, which speaks for itself, for better or for worse. And there's not much more that any of us can add to it.
Last thing I want to say in the intro before we tear into things, on the 4th of March, which is Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. I haven't got my diary in front of me, but I'm 90% sure it's Tuesday, at Bounce in just the Old Street Tube. That's where we've got our Lord's Taverners Fun. It's not really a final word event per se, but a lot of final word presence there. I'm interviewing David Gower on stage. That'll be in the feed, but it's like 15 quid. It's part of the ramp up to our final word fundraising mission for the Edinburgh half marathon, and 10K. Of course, nominations for the 10K are still open. The marathon and half are closed, but you can run the 10K with Jeff, with my wife, Rach, around Arthur's Seat. I would say it's a more picturesque run than the half marathon. As beautiful as it is when you run down to Musselburgh, that's gorgeous. You can pretend you're in that Netflix show One Day from last year, where a couple of those scenes are filmed up there. But yes, of course, that was a book first, before an award-winning book before it was a Netflix show. And the end's just as horrible as it was when I read it 20 years ago. The end is still just as sad.
Hip Hop Crew before it was any of those things. So,
but yeah, the 10K is still open. But the guts of all of this is come along, buy a ticket. Links in the show notes. I'm pretty sure, 90% sure it's still there from the other day. All you need to do is click that. Come along, 15 quid. Meet Gower. I'll do a thing on stage with him for half an hour. It'll be lovely. And it's all about table cricket. So you can actually play table cricket, which is one of the major programs that the Lord's Taverners run for kids with disability who want to have an involvement with cricket, which is what it's all about and why we're so proud to be in association with the Lord's Taverners in their 75th year. So come along, 4th of March at Bounce in Old Street.
Let's play Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge, the game that we play with nice people on the internet who fund this program by sending in contributions in a configuration of currency of their choice, and that configuration means something in cricket, and we have to figure out what it means. Sammy Dowd, long-time friend of the show, good to see her number coming up, has had a few on the show over the years. $8.61 in the AUD. It didn't come with a clue, but, well, in my initial looking at this number, I didn't think it needed one, and I doubt that you did either.
No, I didn't. Sammy's one of our, as you say, one of our great supporters, both online and through Patreon as well. What you need to know about, what I can tell you about Sammy, massive Australian fan and a very enthusiastic David Warner hater. They're the two defining characteristics of her cricket fandom, I think. Loves the Aussie team, follows the game incredibly closely. I love reading what she has to say about it, but I also enjoy the fervour upon which she has... and I'm not just talking like around sandpaper. This goes way back. So, and Death rode him all the way through until he was finished up as an international cricketer. So, Sammy, great to have you back with us. 8 for 61, cut to the car chase. This will be about Mitchell Johnson's best figures in Test cricket, 8 for 61 against South Africa in the December of 2008. But my instinct, Jeff, was that we kind of know the Mitch Johnson Test cricketer story inside and out. Like, it's one of those really well-known stories that that obviously has the challenges with injury and form and losing his spot in the pecking order, then the triumphant return through the summer of 13-14, the series that followed it in South Africa, becoming a World Cup winner again in 2015, and what became a really lovely send-off after passing 300 Test wickets in 2015 in England, and ultimately finishing up a few months on from that at his adopted home ground at the WACA. But I reckon he's like the story before Mitch becomes a Test cricketer, and just when he's starting to find his way in the game, he's one that's less well known and just as good, because he had to go through a lot. So let's do that today. So we're going to go up until the point where he takes his 8 for 61, then go into depth about that spell, that remarkable spell. So Mitch Johnson from Townsville, wanted to be a tennis player. Could have moved to Brisbane at age 14 to further his professional development as a tennis player, but didn't. And then a few years on from that, quite famously, Dennis Lilly saw him bowling at age 17 at some fast bowling camp and described him as a bowler of a lifetime, and that reputation stuck very quickly. Now, he's 17 in 1998, which I was a little bit surprised by, like the Mitch Johnson story gets into turbo drive in 2008, but there is a long, gestation period from the point where Lilly makes that comment, which was widely reported on at the time, that there's this marvel coming through out of northern Queensland. As Crash often says when telling stories about Mitch Johnson, he bowled that spell for Lilly in a pair of golf spikes. So he didn't even have the gear. Worked as a roofer, didn't he, as well? He was, he was having another career alongside his cricket. Yes. And then Dennis Lilly tells Uncle Rod Marsh about this guy, and he's packed off to the academy in 1999. I think he was one of the youngest ever to go to the academy. Not even the youngest. The youngest. It seems to jump out at me that he was. No one's been there at a younger age, something like that. Certainly one of the youngest at age 18.
Yeah,
and
he's got the super emo haircut and like the he's probably wearing a placebo shirt or something like that.
I hope so. And then in early 2000, he plays in the Under-19s World Cup. But then even there in his late teens, this story starts to emerge around back injuries, which is very common for rapid young'uns, right? We know that it's almost like the faster you bowl at 18, the more likely it is that your back's going to snap into at some point and happen 3 or 4 times before you fully, get your groove on. So he did make his first class debut not long after that in November 2001. So he had some injury challenges at the back of that, but played a first class game against New Zealand in November 2001. Hit his first ball for 6 when batting, which I suppose was a bit of a sign of things to come with Mitch and the blade. But with the ball, picked up a couple of wickets. He opened the bowling with Andy Bickle. Ashley Nofke's in that team. Mike Kaspovich is in that team. Andrew Simons is in that attack. So it's a pretty strong Queensland attack, as they all were in that era. His first class wicket was Mark Richardson, who's I suppose is well known for opening the batting as he is racing Darren Lehman and having that horrible bout of cramp, which was televised through the stump mic many years later, which was one of those funny ones where when Glenn and I were doing the book, he was telling me last year that when he went into that profound cramp in Mumbai, when he made his 201 not out, he was reminded of all people. He's like, I thought of Mark Richardson, which is very, very, very on brand for Glenn. Of all the people to cite, it's very on brand.
I'm tipping it's not the first time in his life either that he's thought of Mark Richardson at a
no. He could probably tell you his first class average. That's as I've joked before. This is kind of part of Glenn's charm. In that Shield team, right away, he plays the first class game against New Zealand, then plays the first Shield round. It's a pretty bloody good team. Hayden, Ma, Love, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Stuart Law, of course, the long-term captain, James Hopes, who we did a story on a few weeks ago as well. So they're super strong. But then he gets another injury, like right away. I'm pretty sure that was the bad back injury. So 2 games and done. 2 full years out of professional ranks until 03-04, where he plays 1 game and then he's out again. So you got a vibe of what's going on here, right? That's his third back injury. 2 more full years out till February 2005. And I suppose that's where, after a third major injury, it's sort of jury's out time, isn't it? Like, you expect them to come through, but there's no guarantee. We know there's many cricketers who have had, injuries that have cut them off. We talked about Bert Cockley, didn't we, Jeff, a couple of years, maybe a year ago or something like that, that Cockley was in the Australian squad in 2009 and running amok in domestic cricket, and I spoke to Simon Kadich about him recently, and Steve O'Keefe as well when we were in Sri Lanka. Like, this guy was everything, and in the space of a couple of injuries, he was gone. So thankfully, that wasn't the case for MJ. And it's actually from there at 2005 when things start to click. The 05-06 season, he takes 29 at 25 in a fairly full campaign. He also got on the Australia A tour to Pakistan at the start of the season, indicating that he was already on the radar. He was always on the radar because of what Lily said of him early on, and the impression that he left when he was at the academy and that type of thing. And ultimately, he was fast tracked. He was into the one-day team, getting a debut at the start of that 05-06 season against New Zealand in Christchurch. I forgot about that series. Before the 05-06 home summer, they did go to New Zealand and played a few one-dayers. That was at Lancaster Park, rest in peace. That's that ground that has been knocked down since the earthquake in 2011. Ricky Ponting's team, legends on every line. And interestingly, he was wicketless there, as he was in his next one-dayer against South Africa at the end of that summer. So 2 wicketless matches to start the Johnson international career. And then third time's lucky, on from that against Bangladesh. His first international wicket was Khalid Mashood. He bowled him. He was the Bangladesh wicket keeper.
He bowled those little seamers. He was like a Bangladeshi James Hopes. He was sort of little and nuggety, and he had a round head, and he used to run up and bowl at about 112 k's an hour, and he'd open the bowling for them in tests half the time early on because they didn't have a lot in the way of quick bowling. So little wobblers, and then he'd bat probably 7 maybe, or 6 even, but he wasn't much chop with the bat either. He was your classic early Bangladesh battler. This is from memory. This is my memory of him, unprompted.
No, and your memories are better of that. This is the era where my cricket, like probably 2005 to 2010, that's when I'm sketchy.
He's more, Khalid Masood's there from the start. He's more like early 2000s with Bangladesh. But he plays through for a long time.
So 2006 is when I've often thought about this. It was a quadrangular one-day comp called the DLF Cup in Malaysia, which I always read as the DTF Cup.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah, the Department of Treasury and Finance, of course, is what I'm referring to.
Sure.
And the reason that's jumped out a number of times, that's the first time that Dan Brettig went away with the Australian team when covering that trip, and he wrote about it in Whitewash to Whitewash. That was the first time that he, started his journalism career away from home, and it's been a fairly substantial one, hasn't it, with Bretto now nearing 20 years on the tools. But yeah, I remember one game from that series, and it's the game where Mitch Johnson runs amok. It's an incomplete match as well against India. Australia make 244, and India are 5 for 35 when the rains come, and MJ's got 4 for 11, and that includes Dravid, Sachin, Yuvraj, and he is away. Like, that's the real moment, right? Where everyone's like, right, we've got a guy. It's special. It's fitting that his next turnout was in the Champions Trophy, which was before the 06-07 Ashes. In my mind, I thought it was after that, or at some point after that. I didn't realise it was just before 06-07. And, of course, Australia win that tournament. Johnson plays a number of the games, including the semi. Doesn't get picked for the final. I couldn't work out whether that was due to injury or form, but it was a pretty bloody strong Australian team, so I can easily imagine a world where he was shuffled out. But either way, he got one of those precious cream blazers that don't we all want, that 15 lucky cricketers will get hold of next week when representing the Indian cricket team at Dubai. They get their 15 blazers, which will already be marked up with the BCCI logo and good to go. Well, the ICC logo or whatever, it's the same thing. So the 06-07 Ashes rock
Can't
up.
spell BCCI without ICC.
Indeed. And he's 12th man for the duration of the 06-07 Ashes, in much the same way that Jimmy is 12th man for the entirety of the 05 Ashes, right? I think there's a nice little bit of symmetry there. Like, wouldn't it be beautiful if Anderson had played a test in 05? Wouldn't it have been lovely had Johnson played a test in 06-07? Either of those two things would have been fitting in the same way. Wouldn't it have been great had Wilfred Rhodes played a test in 1930 against Bradman, or two at Australia in 28-29? That'd be another lovely link, but didn't quite happen because, he was well and truly retired by that point, Rhodes, and his comeback's a weird one. Anyway, not getting picked, but still being seen as the next cab off the rank meant that when the one-dayers came after the Ashes was complete, he was getting the chance to get a real crack here at England, and as the coming man. He picked up a fourfer against England at Adelaide, which reinforced that status, and he got picked for the World Cup squad in early 2007. Didn't get ahead of those senior players, though. A remarkable team, Jeff. McGrath, 26 at 13.8 in his final Australian appearances, leading the tournament. Sean Tate, 23 at 20. Bracken, 16 at 16. Hogg, 21 at 16. I mean, a lot of it. They had. I know it was a longer tournament, thus more games, thus more wickets to take, but still, that's just an extraordinary.
Harder to keep your average down, really, over a longer period.
Yeah, indeed. So that's why he couldn't get into the team. But I guess after that, they're looking for the next attack leader, and Johnson is clearly that, along with Brett Lee. But when McGrath retires, they've got their guy, and he plays all the one-dayers in India later in 2007, and that leads up to his test debut at the Gabba a month later in November 2007. Australia make a massive score, and then in response, Sri Lanka. Now, this is the most enjoyable part of this answer for me. Sri Lanka all out 211. Johnson 2 wickets. You could have given me 20 darts at the dartboard. You could have given me 20 darts at the dartboard, and I wouldn't have got this right. Sri Lankan opener, and one we both know well. I'm not even going to make you guess. I mean, maybe give me a few names. Who may it be? Who was opening the batting for Sri Lanka in 2007?
Well, who do we know well is Russell Arnold.
Wasn't Rusty, but it's a fair guess for the era. Wasn't Rusty, wasn't all the guys you know.
Usually opening around there it's Dilshan, isn't it? It wasn't the other Joe Ordner, the wicketkeeper.
No.
No.
It was none of them. I'll cut to the car chase here because I'm mindful we've got to get to a break soon. It was a bloke who made his test debut in 1990. And this was the end of his 17-year career. Marvin Atapatu played his penultimate test match in Johnson's first test match. I just how the fuck was Marvin Atapatu still playing in 2007? Staggered by that. The guy who had, 5 ducks in his first 6 innings or something like that, and went on to have a really good career. He averaged 40 and made 16 test tons. But
made a lot of doubles.
Made a lot of doubles, indeed. But yes, in his final series, Atapatu playing at about age 40 was Johnson's first test wicket. So, nice little link in the chain there, Jeff. We always talk about links in the chain from cricket eras past. Well, who did Atapatu play against in 1990? And, we can go all the way back to W.G. Grace in about 7 leaps or 10 leaps or something like that. Anyway, so that's the start of his test career. It was a steady start, nothing wild. A couple of forfers, which were important at Adelaide, in a draw, and in Perth in a loss against India later that summer. That was quite a big test match, wasn't it? The Perth test match where Australia went down. And by that point, he'd signed up to play for WA the following year, and that's quite important in this Mitchell Johnson story, that he'd agreed to move to WA for family reasons in 2008 with his new partner, with his partner, sorry. And this was building nicely. So in 2008, lots of test matches. The Simon Kadich year, they go to the West Indies, they go to India. Johnson takes a 4-for at Bridgetown, a 4-for at Bangalore. Then he gets home, has a massive test against New Zealand, 9 for 69 against New Zealand, including his first fifer. So he's flying here. Interestingly, in that man of the match effort, he was bowling second change. So it's quite unusual to see someone bowling second change as a seamer get match figures of 9 for 69 and win the man of the match. But so he did. And after those 2 test matches against New Zealand, we arrive at this monumental moment in his career. The first time that he's up against South Africa. To this point, he's played 15 test matches and taken 61 wickets at 29. So a very good, without being exceptional, start to his career. That's a perfectly reasonable number of wickets per test and an average and all the rest of it. But this is the day, and I'll never forget it. It was a Thursday afternoon in Perth, which meant it was a Thursday evening on the eastern seaboard. I was working in the PM's press office at the time, and we had 3 TV screens up on the wall, a bit like Elvis Presley. 3 TV screens up on the wall, and all of them were on Channel 9, watching Mitchell Johnson do something quite remarkable. Just to give context, Australia's 375, and in reply, they are 3 for 234. So they are well on their way, South Africa, to a first innings lead. And then Johnson goes absolutely nuts. He's already had a couple of wickets early on. He's had the 3 wickets to fall to that point, I think, or 2 of the 3. Comes back late in the day. A stunning bit of bowling to pick up AB de Villiers bowling across in one that jags away. Caught behind, then gets Jacques Kallis in very similar way. Tony Greig's going wild on commentary. A hideous bouncer to JP Duminy on debut, which is gloved around the corner. That's his 5th. Carnage, all in the same spell. Morné Morkel leading edge. He's now got 6 for. Then that was a slower ball to get Morné Morkel. And on comms, Tubby's going wild. So he's got a brain as well. It's not just pace. He's got one with the bouncer. He's got one with the slower ball. This guy's brilliant. Tubby's giving it everything.
You've got to love that it makes you a genius to bowl a slower ball. They're like, no one would have thought of that.
Yeah, I see his point, though. When he's bombing these guys to get someone with a slower one, no one's expecting that deep in the crease. With the score still on 241, a 3rd wicket, caught round the corner, Harris, which makes the collapse 5 for 7, gives Johnson 5 for 2 in 20 balls in prime time. A 3rd catch to Jason Frazier in all that as well, I should say, which is a nice rarity and oddity for you. And
he was a short leg, wasn't he? Crazy.
He was round the corner and he took one at mid off, one at mid on, I think. And then a brute the next morning to get his 8th. He actually had 8 out of 9. I didn't realise that he had 9 on the shelf. He ended up with 8 for 61, but I guess in historical context, 8 for 61 we remember, 9 for 61 we never forget, right? But anyway, still, what a moment. 8 for 61 on his new home ground. No doubt as to who Australia's number 1 was after that. Yes, they lose the test match, but he's still got 3 of the 4 in the second dig to give him an 11-wicket match, and we know what goes on to happen in 2009 in South Africa, and he wins the Sobers Award in 2009 for the best international cricketer. But it all started at the WACA on December the 18th, 2008, a time I remember well in my life. For Sammy Dowd, Johnson's 8 for 61.
There you go. That was as rapid fire and as hectic as the spell itself. Sammy, hope you enjoyed that. Break time.
It is the final word story time. It's the 217th time we've made this show. The show is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. Jeff, we've been really happy telling the story throughout February, and we're kind of at the end of February here now, so we might move on to a different topic for Maurice Blackburn in March, but that we've had them with us throughout the summer talking about what super insurance is. I must admit, Jeff, I didn't know anything about it, and I used to work in super, which indicates that it's probably a class of insurance that across the country we should know more about. That if you are unable to work, that it's entirely likely that your scheme builds into it the ability to be insured if something horrible happens in life. And of course, insurance is an uncomfortable topic, isn't it? I've got life insurance with my family, obviously, and with the kids and other types of insurance in the event that either Rachel or I or both of us passed away. It's horrible to speak about and think about, but you need to. It's a requirement of life to have these unfortunate, horrible scenario building things that you need to have, and this is one of those areas where, in a lot of super funds, they've already done that thinking for you, and they've got ahead of the curve with the type of insurance.
You don't want to need it, but if you do need it, then you need it. And when you've got super funds that are about looking after people when they retire from working, you've also got to have the option to look after people if they're unable to work during what would normally be their working life. So that's what super insurance is about. Getting access to it isn't always easy. Sometimes you need help to make sure that those policies are paid out in the fullness that they're supposed to be. And so that's where Maurice Blackburn are the experts in making sure that happens.
So all you need to do is search Maurice Blackburn Super Insurance to find out more. No win, no fee is a big part of their story. It's just the complexity of the process. Imagine you're in that situation where things are really rugged and really tough, and you need these things to be pieced together for you. No one better than Maurice Blackburn. So search Maurice Blackburn Super Insurance to find out more. Jeff, you're going to tell us some more as well, because you're next up on Storytime 217, and I'm scanning up my page to find out what your number is. Let me find it here. It is for Jack Hughes. Hughes, 556. He's new. Jack's rocked up. Jack's rocked up. Jack's one of our 840 something patrons. Our members, our proud, passionate, and paid-up members, that seemed to strike a chord after our weekly show, so I'm going to keep saying it. Become one of them at patreon.com/thefinalword. Jack's got a clue for you. For his swing on my number, so not really a clue, but he's giving you some steering. Looking forward to hearing what you can come up with. Thanks for putting together such a fantastic podcast. I've recently become a father, and your podcast has become a staple during the bath, bottle, bed routine. Hoping some of your love and enthusiasm for cricket helps seep into Hazel's brain. What a beautiful name. Little baby Hazel, I hope you're listening to this right now. Congratulations, Jack, becoming a girl dad. That's a really cool thing. I saw that Pat Cummins put up a post the other day where he just had in his caption, girl dad. I'm like, I totally get it, mate. I totally understand how you feel right now. It's the best thing for me anyway in the world. And my girls don't listen to podcasts with me when I'm doing baths in the evening, but they listen to my choir songs, which I sing to them, and other songs too. So this is all part of the life cycle, and Jeff's going to tell Jack all about 556.
Well, there was a subsequent message from Jack as well that came in to say, on another note, my display picture is from the now defunct Western Leadbeaters Cricket Club. So the Leadbeater is a possum, isn't it? Who played out of Flemington. The association changed their rules about club logos the year after it was submitted, but they let us keep it for the 10 years the club was up and running. It was a Microsoft Paint special. I believe they took issue with the fact that the Western Leadbeater possum, there it is, was smoking a cigarette with a VB in its other hand. So, okay, that's the kind of gear that we're dealing with. All right, 556, free hit. I'm going to go somewhere that, let's see. I'm going to pop quiz you, Adam. If I told you this sequence of scores, who might you think that this relates to?
Okay.
6, 66, 112, 40, 11, 199, 69, 37, 12, and 4. If that were a sequence of scores.
Gosh, Test 199s. Test 199s. Well, there's a Steve Smith. But I know that Smith got his 215 because Test 199s. Come on, Adam, use your noggin. Steve Waugh got a Test 199.
He did, but it's not him.
In the Caribbean.
Someone he played with.
Someone he played with, a Test 199 with a teammate of Steve Waugh's. It must be a prominent teammate to have made 199. Wasn't Matt Elliott. He got a high 190s, but it wasn't 199.
Wasn't it?
But it wasn't 199, Matt Elliott. I didn't realise it was 199 at Leeds in 97. In Ponting's first Test match, or Ponting's first Test 100, sorry, that he made it in concert with Matty Elliott. I watched that at my grandmother's house on a Saturday night in 1997.
Well, that is a run of 10 scores, and those are the 10 scores that Matthew Elliott made during that tour of England. And those numbers add up to 556,
Beautiful.
Which is our nerd pledge number. 10 innings, batted every time, made 200s, magnificent Ashes series, really, 2 centuries, a couple of 60s in there as well. You were talking about having a blank spot. I've got a bit of a blank spot in that sort of second half of the 90s, I think, with where like I was living somewhere remote and I didn't have a lot of access to the cricket, and there's stuff that's just not in my brain as much. And something like Matthew Elliott, that chunk of his career really is in there where in my head he didn't play as many as 21 Test matches. You know, that that's actually quite a substantial career compared to a lot of people to get past 20 Tests is a fair chunk. You know, not 20 innings, but 20 matches. And he starts in 1995 when he makes 100 for the Rezzies against the touring Windies. They're not called Australia A at that point. They're the Australian 11 in Hobart, and he gets picked for Brisbane on the basis of that duck-on debut. When he didn't hit it, umpire Venkat fired him off the sleeve and made 21 in the second innings. That's the match we talked about with Ian Healy at Christmas where Healy made his 161. and then 29 batting first in Sydney. And I reckon like that's an era where you don't get a lot of chances in the Australian team. 3 innings, no big scores. You wouldn't be feeling very good about himself at that point. 78 not out in the second innings, and that's when he has the collision with Mark Waugh. And this is the other memory hole bit where, in my mind, that collision and that knee injury has him out for a really long time, and that's sort of what ruins the career in my head. But it's actually so early. It's only the 4th innings of his career when that happens.
And look, so Elliott has that remarkable run in 94, 95 for the Vicks. And that goes into 95, 96 as well. So the same time that Brad Hodge is prolific, and Dean Jones. Elliott's a huge part of that story. They win the Mercantile Mutual in that stretch, and I think they're 3rd in the Shield. But it's more than that. It's like they're posting big numbers. The MCG is a great place to bat. I saw Elliott make his first double 100 in first-class cricket, which I've told you the story of Ian Harvey getting 100, on the same day in the same innings. So Harvey finished with 100 not out, and Elliott finished with 206 not out. So he was like, and that was in the February of 1996. So that was probably that was the season before he made his Test debut. He makes his debut in 96, 97. And that Brisbane Test of 96 is a funny one too, isn't it? Because you got Bevan playing, Ponting dropped, perception about Bevan, they bomb him. He gets out to the short ball at Brisbane. He ends up getting through that summer and having a really good time of it, which is often forgotten. And we did this in the live show. He makes really crucial, gutsy runs at important times, in addition to taking a boatload of wickets. But like that's when Ponting has his period of time out of the Aussie team. And of course, Michael Slater has made way to enable Matthew Elliott to have a Test career. And you've only got to go back a couple of years to when Slater was the most dynamic opener in Test cricket. So your point about it being ruthless is absolutely bang on.
Yeah, it's an absolutely ruthless period. And that injury, which doesn't keep him out for nearly as long as I remembered, it's really only a couple of months in the end. But it's such a bizarre, just watching it back today, where Elliott's on strike, he's clipped to behind square, he's taken the first run, he's crossed over to the other side of the pitch just to make sure that he's completely out of the way. And then somehow Mark Waugh is drifting across the pitch while turned around, watching the ball at deep backward square leg somehow, and manages to kind of reverse into the path almost of Elliott and clip him and then sort of fall on him. And then neither of them get run out because it's Carl Hooper, isn't it, who takes the throw, doesn't take the bails off at his end, which he could have done, and instead throws it back to the keeper's end, and Elliott's able to crawl into his ground. So he's not run out, but he does retire hurt immediately on 78.
I can tell you where I was watching it. In fact, I'll give you a prop. I've got my Endeavour Hills cap here from that era, probably from 1996. I reckon. I got this for Christmas around that time. I've got it out at the moment because I'm doing a thing at Winnie School today about cricket, and I thought I'd bring an old cricket cap with me. But yes, I remember there was a pool table and there was a TV right above it, and we were playing pool, watching Mark Waugh and Matthew Elliott bat, and Elliott went down, and we were all as one gutted, because you know what it's like. You're watching a Victorian play. You know, you're riding him through to his first Test 100. There was sufficient runs left that he was going to get there, and it was going to be this crowning moment and all the rest, and it wasn't to be. But yes, I remember watching that as it happened at the cricket club on a Sunday afternoon.
End of November when that happens, and he's back by the end of February, so it wasn't a long-term injury. He's back in South Africa, makes 85 in Joburg, makes a 23, 44, 18 and 12 after that, so he's not setting the world on fire, but it's enough to get into England, and he has what is actually a great tour, 556 runs at 55. You know, that's outstanding, opening the batting, that huge score at Headingley where Ponting makes his first 100, and Elliott described Jason Gillespie's spell as scary quick when that's Gillespie's 7 for, isn't it?
Down the hill. When there was a hill. Home, when there was the hill at Headingley, I think a lot of them have said it's the fastest they've ever seen anyone bowl was Gillespie down the hill that day. So I love that stuff. I love what people think. Yeah.
There's been a lot of things going downhill at Headingley since then. Plays against New Zealand at home. 18 and 11 at the Gabba. Doesn't like playing at the Gabba, apparently. 42 in Perth and then 112 in Hobart. That Hobart game's interesting. That's the week that Mark Taylor and Ian Healy get dropped from the one-day team, and it's the first sort of split the division between the white ball and red ball, that turning point. The Test becomes a bit one-day influenced. It gets a bit funky with the batting orders. They have a lot of rain. Stephen Fleming declares 150 behind. Mark Waugh gets sent up the order to set a target. gets out cheaply. Greg Blewett tees off and makes a quick 50 for the Times anyway. Chris Cairns gets promoted for New Zealand. He gets out. Nathan Astle has a lash at the top of the order. They're trying to chase 288 in 2 sessions. They're sort of on track for a while, and then Shane Warne takes 5 wickets straight through the middle of the card, and they end up 9 down with about an hour left. It's Shane O'Connor and Simon Doull who bat through for the last hour or so.
That's right.
Saved the Test match 9 wickets down. So pretty extraordinary finish. So Elliott gets the 100, but it doesn't contribute to a win. He's made his 3rd ton, but yeah, it's like we say, you can't have a bad series. So he's made that 100. Then he has 5 innings against South Africa, top scorer 32. This is January 98. And then he's gone. Yeah. He's out for more than a year and doesn't get back until the Caribbean Tour of 99.
Look, I'm not going to say it's the worst decision that Steve Randall made in his life. I wouldn't say that. But the league before decision, second dig, Melbourne, Elliott hit him on the fucking hip. Fair dinkum. One of the worst bits of umpiring I've ever seen. At least that's how I remember it from watching Behind the Bowler's Arm in the Southern Stand. And you can imagine what it was like up there, all the diehards like me with their school books out, in that part of the ground right behind, how we responded to a Victorian being fired. And that's just before there was obviously 2 neutral umpires not long after that. But a bad decision from someone who turned out to be a very bad man.
Yeah, well, it's whether that's the thing that costs him, I don't know. But he's out for a year and change, and then goes on that Caribbean tour, the famous one of 99. Makes 44 in the first innings, and then struggles after that. 6 innings in the series, 3 ducks, makes a duck in each test, gets punted for the 4th test, which they win. Does not complain about it for the rest of his life, like Shane Warne, but he cops that on the chin for the most part. And that's pretty much it. He as far as Test cricket's concerned, goes back to Victoria, makes a fair few runs and then a fair few runs and then just a punishing amount of runs in the year before he gets a very late recall. He makes over 1,400 runs at 79. Huge 100 and then 55 not out in the winning Shield final. Goes to England, keeps piling them up for Glamorgan, has a 1,300-run season there. And halfway through that season, there's this strange little moment of synchronicity, of serendipity, the circle of life and death. Ricky Ponting's at a funeral. Matthew Elliott's come home to see the birth of his baby. And in that moment, in that time, there's an opportunity to play a test match against Sri Lanka in the top end in July, and Elliott's the one who's called in, so he's batting at first drop. It's only ever going to be 1 test because Ponting's coming back, but it doesn't go so well for him in runs terms. Gets a boot up the Chaminda Vas, but and makes 0 and 1. I think it's Dilshan in the gully, I reckon, from memory, and Russell Arnold takes the other catch. I can't remember where he was fielding. Maybe it's slip.
He gets 2 absolute peaches. I mean, it's just one of those things, right? Like after averaging 80 in the previous Shield season, making 700s, including that monster in the Shield final, which was a huge deal. The 03-04 Shield season for Victoria. Remember, they hadn't won one since 1991. It's been a long time in Victorian terms since they've won a Shield. And the tragedy of David Hooks' passing in the January of that season, it had so much on it, so much riding on it, and the fact that it was Queensland, who'd been their arch rival for so long, and being able to, really drive Queensland into the ground. It was the year where the southern stand had everyone in it because the northern side of the ground was being renovated. There was no member stand that year that had been knocked down after the footy season, and there was still a hole, I think, from the Ponsford side of the ground. Either way, everything was in the southern stand, including the players' dressing rooms. They relocated to the football dressing rooms for one season, and it was like 20,000 people there. It was amazing. It was a really cool thing to watch Victoria pile on 800 or whatever it was, and bowl them out twice, and everyone piling onto the MCG to watch Darren Berry receive the Sheffield Shield, and a young Cameron White, who was central to that as well. Andrew McDonald, who bowled beautifully, likewise Ian Harvey, but all set up by Elliott. Only for him to get that test match against Sri Lanka, everyone to be tremendously excited. First test in 5 years. Boy, had he earned it. And then getting 2 absolute seeds from Chaminda Vas, which can happen to anyone. So, it's sad that it ends that way. I'm glad he got the other opportunity. I'm sure he is as well. But it doesn't end in a glorious way at all.
But you make it back. You've got to do the work to make it back, and it did mean a lot to him. So he has a few more years in domestic cricket. I love the footage of him batting in the floppy hat in domestic one-dayers. That's vintage Matthew Elliott stuff. And he smashed it in the 50-over stuff in the last few years of his career, where he hadn't really made that click in the early parts of his career, but he really figures that format out and makes a lot of hundreds in his last few seasons. So 50 first-class tons and 17 List A tons by the end of it. 50 first-class tons, wow. 17 in List A. 3 Test hundreds, about 23,000 professional runs. It's a monster career, and it was punctuated by that Ashes tour, the high point of it, 556 runs. That is my answer for Jack Hughes.
I like that. So I didn't realise it was an even 50. That's exactly the number of first-class 50s that Bill Lawry made. So there's some synergy there between Lawry, left-handed opening bat, Victoria legend, and I mean Lawry's test record is dramatically better than that. Obviously, having been a champion of the era, hitting 1300s and averaging in the high 40s, and having had that had that great trip to England in '61 that started it all. I didn't realise that an even 50 for Elliott and Lawry, and both been recognised by Victoria in various ways, and rightly so.
Mm-hmm. So that's for Jack. Before we get to the next number, let's squeeze in the last break, and then we will have an open field, an unfettered gallop. Story time, 2:17, me and him. Ken Edwards next up. It's one for me here, Jeff. 71.43 in the Czech currency, which we in the past have described as zloty incorrectly. Yes, it has a Z in the middle of it, so it always makes me think zloty, but CZK I think is a krona, which would be a crown in the old sense. And the medieval peasants were always asking for half a crown or something. Ken Edwards in that currency, 71.43, says, easy. I want to hear the story of this former Test cricketer and selector, allegedly taught SKW, Shane Warne for the uninitiated, the flipper. And Jeff Boycott said famously of his batting, the sort who would carry a bat for decoration rather than as a useful weapon. Yeah, this is a good one. So yes, in the krona, good King Wenceslas. I'm not sure whether there's any relationship between him and the currency based on what you said before. Once looked down on the Feast of Eden. I don't remember. When the snow was all around. I don't know. I don't know what he was doing. Better you than me. So it's one of these Warnie's flipper. Success has 1,000 fathers, right? So Warnie at different points credited a number of people as having. So one of those was Jack Potter, who was a Victorian leg spinner who Warne often credited. Richie Benaud as well, which I like the Benaud one the best in some respects because Benaud famously learnt the flipper from Doug Ring on the 1953 Ashes trip. Who I think it was with does the story, was it an orange on a bus or an apple on a bus or something like that, where Benaud and Ring were bowling together in 53. And of course, Ring goes back to 1948 with the Invincibles tour and that type of thing. So again, cricket eras overlapping and that type of thing. So the idea of it going from one of Bradman's Invincibles to Richie Benaud to Shane Warne has got a certain poetry to it. It's attractive. But there's another man as well who did the craft between times. And, this was in an era when the craft was said to be dead leg spin, but it wasn't quite. It was like on life support, you might want to say, to continue that analogy. And this number relates to the guy who did it as well as anyone. According to Gideon Haigh, did it better than anyone between Benaud and Warne. One, Jim Higgs. I don't think we've had the chance to tell the Jim Higgs story before outside of the trivia around the 1975 Ashes, which I'll touch on briefly in a sec, which goes to the Boycott bit from before. But yeah, the Jim Higgs story starts, he's born in 1950 in rural Victoria, ends up at Melbourne Uni doing engineering and playing for that club in district cricket in the early 70s. And he's vaulted into the Shield team young. So he plays his first Shield game in early 1971. And made a decent enough mark, really. So much so that by 72, 73, he's being talked up for the Australian tour. It's coming at the end of that summer to the West Indies. Now, he loses his way a little bit in that season. Ray Bright comes along into the Victorian setup and effectively replaces him as the primary spinner at Shield level. So he doesn't end up on that tour in 73, but I suppose you get a sense there of people who have seen him, they like him, they think he might be a bit of a thing in his early 20s. His next season, not as productive, but is known for taking 8 for 19 in a district game. 8 for 19. That's by now for Richmond against Northcote.
Now, speaking of big bags for not many runs in Shield cricket, on the weekend, Luke Stowe built a man a statue. At one stage for Hawthorn, he had 6 for 9 against Camberwell, which is in first grade cricket in Melbourne. Young Luke Stowe was one of my boys who played in my development team in my last year at Endeavour Hills. So I mentioned before he was from Gippsland, and he was playing cricket in Gippsland on Saturdays, playing in the Merc with me on a Sunday. So you could tell it, I think he was 15, something like that. It might have been under 16s. Either way, you could tell he was quick and talented, and it was just about where his career would go. Well, a decade on from that, it's his second fifer in this district season, having at one stage 6 for 7 bowling figures the other day. Get him in the Shield team. Get Luke Stowe in that Victorian team, and we will interview him and we will tell his story in more depth. But lovely kid, great cricketing family as well. So anyway, back to Jim Higgs. After various false starts and near misses, it's in 1974-75, which is, I guess, a famous Australian summer, isn't it, Jeff, with Lily and Tomo and the English being totally brutalised. Meanwhile, in the Shield, it's the slow bowling of Higgs, the leg breaks, that are giving him by far his best season yet. 42 wickets at 22, so great numbers for a leg spinner in Australia, and he's properly set now. It includes another 8-wicket bag, this time in Shield cricket, 8 for 66 against WA. But I looked at his numbers, he gets wickets against pretty much every state, like 5s and 6s. So he's had a chance to impress around the country, and that's why he gets picked for the 1975 tour of England. And I think, sadly, in some respects, this is the tour he's best known for, despite not having played a test match. Ashley Mallett, who was clearly the frontline Australian spinner at the time, there was no doubting that he would play in the test matches. Higgs was his backup. But as we know, that there are so many first-class games they play in that era, it meant that Higgs got a chance to play 8 matches on that tour, which is great. Gets the chance to get around and have a proper season over in the UK, 8 first-class games. Far preferable to, the backup spinner in 2015, Fawad Ahmed, who played probably 3. And good luck getting any as the backup spinner in 2027 when they probably won't play a tour game at all. Did they play any in 23? They played... No. Did we go to Worcester in 23 or was that 19? 19 we went to 19. Worcester. And we went to Derby 19, in 19.
We had 3 games. We had Derby
Worcester.
In between the second and third tests. And
there was another one at the start, I reckon. There was one at the very start.
There was that tour game thing. There was that the 12.
Oh, yeah.
The Haddon 12 and the Hick 12.
Time-honoured rivalry. But yeah, I think in 23 they went World Test Championship final straight into it, and we didn't have a break in between, did we? So you wouldn't want to be the second spinner these days in terms of actually getting a trundle in England. But back then, different story. So 8 matches, right? Now, I think everybody kind of knows that Jim Higgs didn't make a run on tour. That's the thing that people know about him. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he, in that 8 games, batted 12 times and, got 6 ducks. Not at all. He only batted twice. He only faced 1 ball. He faced 1 ball in the series. He was bowled for naught against Leicestershire. And that's it. Justice for Jim Higgs. The perception that he was this...
I think that is the thing that's funny, that he only faced 1 ball. Isn't that that's kind of the punchline more than... I mean, Boycott being a prick is no surprise to anybody, but...
I mean, obviously Jim Higgs was no batter to speak of, but I feel like the way that it is told, that story's told, is like he went the whole summer of England and didn't make a run. And that's true. I mean, strictly speaking, true.
Yeah.
But the body of, it doesn't, like, the way that's said and the way that is different. Facing 1 ball and being dismissed from it is nowhere near as dramatic as, like, playing 10 times and not making a run. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
He
and
did
it's not like he was there as a batter, so who cares if he didn't face?
That's it.
It's not unusual that he didn't face. If you went as a reserve bat and you faced 1 ball in the summer, then it would be notable. Oh, you went on a whole Ashes tour and you faced 1 ball. But he still went and bowled, presumably.
And he bowled really well.
How'd he go? Did he bowl okay?
Yeah, he got 6 wickets against the MCC, 7 against Somerset. I mean, across games, not in innings, but still, 27 at 32 from limited opportunities, a perfectly acceptable season, right? Sure. Unfortunately, he sort of fell away after that in the short term. Terry Jenner emerged and overtook him. As we know, great man Kerry O'Keefe was back on the scene by this point as well, having had his mid-career hiatus of sorts. So it's tricky for him to get a spot as a leg spinner in the Australian setup for a while. He did win a flag for Richmond, their first in 30 years in 76-77. He picked up 9 wickets in the grand final. So a big part of the Jim Higgs story is that he was always there taking wickets at district level and keeping himself front and centre. And then World Series cricket comes around and the whole story changes. And suddenly he's
apparently
back in contention.
When they won that final for Richmond, he left his car at the MCG for 6 months.
Yeah, Tony Jewell was the coach. Who knows? Maybe he was. Tony Jewell might have played cricket. I mean, obviously his son played in the Shield final, didn't he? I cite Jewell because he was the previous Richmond coach that led them to glory between then and when Dusty lost his car in the car park between 1980 and 2017. So what's that? 37 years. So this Richmond cricket drought was shorter than that. But yeah, World Series cricket comes around. He takes 6 for against the touring Indians for Victoria, but they give Tony Mann the gig. And that's, we've done Tony Mann's story on Storytime before. That was a reasonable decision. Then they go to Yardley later in the summer. So he isn't quite getting a Guernsey, but he's nearly there. And they take him to the West Indies. And finally, he's in a proper touring squad and he's going to play Test cricket. And that's confirmed when he takes 12 wickets against the Leeward Islands to start the trip. At last, after several false starts, Jim Higgs gets a Test cap in early 1978, cap number 295 for the men. It's at Port of Spain, and it's a bad loss. They're all out for 90. But he does his job, takes 4 for 91 in his first innings as a Test bowler. I read that card, I'm like, good on him. He finally gets there after all these years of being ever so close and makes it count. A handy first Test wicket, Desmond Haynes. So, you take that. Doesn't get a chance to bowl again. Desmond Haynes and Marvin Atapatu forever linked in this show on the basis of being the first Test wicket of a couple of Australians. It's never had those two in the same sentence before.
Desi and Marvin. No. Yep. Imagine sharing a tuk-tuk with them. 3 in the back, you're in the middle, Desi on the left, Marvin on the right.
I'm just watching. It's an up and down tour. He is dropped. But he gets wickets every time he bowls. There's no nunfers there. It's a commendable trip, his first Test trip. And, of course, that particular tour was when they were going to win that final Test match, but we've told the story of the riot before, haven't we? And he played in that match. So that would have been a very interesting life experience for him to have seen at close quarters. Keeps his spot for the home Ashes series of 78-79, which I've talked about in some depth before through the medium of the Alan Lee book, which I read a couple of years ago. Doesn't get any wickets in his first Test in Australia. That's at Brisbane, but does keep his spot, then loses his spot, then gets back for Melbourne, and they have a win. That deserves more attention. Like Australia beating England at that time with half a team. That's not even half a team. That's a real thing. And he takes 2 for 29, Higgs in the 4th innings of that helped Australia win by about 100 runs. And one of those wickets was a bloke called Botham. So, he does his job. In a rare moment of joy for Australian cricket at that juncture. His best personal Ashes moment was 5 for 148 from 59.6 overs, 8 ball overs. 59.6 8 ball overs. What a shift that is. That's at Sydney. That's at Sydney.
I'm making a ruling on that. Shouldn't have to bowl that many.
And then ends his summer with another 4-fer. So it's been a hard slog. He's had ups and downs, but he's played in a win, played a role in a win, taken a 5-fer for the first time, another 4-fer, and he got to the end of it in the Test team, and he keeps his spot for that tour of India, where Kim Hughes is captain, the first time away from home that Hughes is leading Australia. Chennai is the first Test match. Australia 390, Border, his famous 162 not out, and Kim Hughes gets an even 100. So they're right in the game. But India threaten to take it away from them. India are batting well. They're not losing wickets. It's one of those Test matches, Jeff, where Australia probably make 390, India probably make 600, and Australia are all out for 150, and India still win by innings, if you know what I mean. It's going in that way. Until Jim Higgs gets on at one end and doesn't get off. He takes 7 for 143 bowling all day to keep India in check in the fiercely hot conditions. So hot that Rodney Hogg couldn't grip the ball because there was so much sweat. Higgs had trouble gripping the ball there at Chennai as well. We've seen Test matches there in the past which have been brutal, and this was certainly one of those. But 7 for 143, which is our number. Our pledge here is 7143. So this will be what is being referred to here as the Ned pledge number. So Wisden had just one line devoted to it in their match report, I'm afraid to say, so I can't tell you an awful lot more. remarkably tidy for a leg spinner. Yeah, too right of this. He took 7 for, kept them in the game.
Yeah.
And they get a draw there, a well-earned draw, which, you know, when you consider they were getting beaten routinely, a well-earned draw is not for nothing. They got 4 draws in that series. I know that Higgs' returns were diminishing from that point forward, but they lost 2-0 in a 6-test series in India. Imagine we had 6-test series in India that lasted 4 months now, Jeff.
Don't say
that
it.
would be something.
Don't say it.
That would be something.
They'll do it.
Maybe
the money's there.
Maybe when there's 3 test teams left, it might be 6, 7, 8 test match series. I mean, whatever. Squeeze that sponge, that cash cow, fatten it up.
Just do like a 3-month triangular with, England and Australia will both go to India and they'll just alternate.
Don't rule that out. That would be a profitable thing. Moving Australia playing England in Mumbai and then, India playing England at Sydney. Like those test matches would do well. Anyway, let's hope that never happens, but it probably will. And then, so he does well enough in India to keep his spot for the next summer. And this is a noteworthy moment, I reckon, in all of this. They're playing the Windies in 79-80, post-reunification. The Packer players are back. And he's
Berlin Wall's down.
And he's picked in the second test.
Yeah.
And he's picked in that second test match. So for one brief moment at that point, he is the best spinner in Australia.
Yes.
Without caveat. Without
Get in,
caveat.
Jim. Yep.
A team with Dennis Lilly, Rob Marsh, Chappell, and on that team sheet at number 11 is Jim Higgs. And, as it turns out, they do pretty well. And this is a moment in time for the Windies as well. It's not so good for Australia, but this is where they win 2-0 with Roberts, Holding, Garner, Croft, and Viv averages 100, and it's all pretty horrible. So, the test that Higgs plays, they're badly beaten in. But it's not on him. That Windies are just fundamentally too strong at that point, and that's when they begin their period of hegemonic control of Test cricket for a decade or more. Higgs only played a couple of Test matches later in the summer, but he does well. 2 forfers against New Zealand when they're visiting, and then one final strong performance in early 1981. He takes forfeit against India on the final day to help Australia win a Test match there. But the sadness in all of this is that there was so lacking in faith about wrist spinners at the time that there were comments on the record saying, we're not going to take him. He's the best spinner in Australia, but we're not going to take him to England because we formed a view that it isn't the best way to win Test matches in England, wrist spin. So he was left out, didn't get to go to England in 1981, didn't play a Test match again.
Yeah. Clearly not the best way. That's why, Clary Grimmett had a dreadful record in England. That's why
Shane Warne
Bill
goes
O'Reilly had
okay.
a dreadful record in England. Yeah, well, hadn't played at that point. But if you're making the decision in the 1980s, there's still a body of evidence that suggests that you can, in fact, bowl leg spin in England.
Indeed, not wrong at all, especially when he goes on to be a big part of that Warne story that we referred to before, and the flipper clearly is instrumental to all of that. So he does play, you said 20 tests is a worthy career. He gets 22 test matches, 66 wickets at 31, most commendable. Interestingly here that, his batting, yes, it was dreadful. 111 test runs at 5.5, in line with his first-class numbers. So first-class level, sadly, 399 wickets at 29. Again, very nice numbers. But only 384 runs. So across a really long Victorian career, more wickets than runs. Most unusual to have more wickets than runs in first-class level. And he finished his first-class career, his last 5 games, 0 not out, 1 not out, duck 6, duck 1 not out, duck, duck, duck. So, he had a bit to play to at the end. As he was ending his Victorian career in the early 80s, he finished it as he had the reputation of doing in making fuck all runs. He was a test selector through the mid-1980s, a board member with Cricket Victoria in the 1990s, and the man who was credited with giving Warne the flipper, that lovely through line of Australian leg spin. And a big part of that tradition was Jim Higgs. Best test figures of 7 for 143 for Ken Edwards.
Jim Higgs, if only he had a career as a bosun, then that would have been perfect. Thank you. Good story, good number. I knew the bits, I knew the trivia stuff of the Jim Higgs story, but not necessarily the other parts. So enjoyable to find out about him. I've got one more number. It's Michael Fallon. It's $1.04. Well, it's not actually, because he kept his pledge the same as the last number, but just said he'll change his number without changing the pledge.
All right.
Because he didn't want to drop us down to $1.04. So that's
thank
nice.
you.
Thank you, Michael.
Appreciate that.
He's just said, for now, I'll just say it has a similar theme to my past pledges. And history for Michael Fallon, Adam, suggests Western Australia. We've had pledges about Adam Voges from Michael. We've had pledges about Mike Valletta. I think you did the story about the Valletta-Rod Marsh partnership.
Yep,
It was
that
a record.
86, I think,
time.
from memory. Yep.
We had Michael was the one who sent through a clue I enjoyed about Matthew Wade bowling first change at Perth Stadium when he did that. Remember when Josh Hazelwood off injured early in a test match, never happened. But the one against New Zealand, the day-night test.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought WA, 104, slam dunk. I thought Western Australian wicketkeeper bat, born in Yorkshire, who changed loyalties and moved to Australia. Not Josh Inglis, Sam Whiteman. Odd to have two. Yeah, strange to have two of them, but they did. Who made 104, opening the batting as skipper in the first innings in the Shield final win last time around that got WA their hat trick when they won 3 Shield titles in a row. And there's Whiteman. It's funny. It's like talking about the Elliott thing, where there are ways you remember it, and then it doesn't quite pan out that way when you look at the cold hard facts. Like, I've always had the idea that Sam Whiteman should have cracked it at national level.
Yeah.
And it didn't quite happen for whatever reason. The returns, the early returns are not as compelling as I had imagined, perhaps, although he's batting down the order. He's playing as a wicketkeeper at that point, so he's not necessarily needing to make huge runs. But the perception of it, I think, is down to the second Shield season that he plays. He does well. He doesn't make any hundreds, but he makes a lot of 50s. He's consistent. He makes 687 runs at 45. He's a young keeper. They make it to a final. They play out a drawn final and lose it based on ladder position to New South Wales, I think. And then he gets picked for an Australia A game in the top end, the middle of the year, and makes a big 174 in another record partnership, another WA record, well, an Australian first-class record. I think it still is for the 7th wicket. Mitch Marsh makes a double.
That's the Mitch Marsh double ton that takes like 450 balls, and that's the one where people, I might be exaggerating it, but it's a really, really long, from a tough situation, and that was like, the smart judges are like, well, if you can do that, in addition to clouting it, this is a test player that we could look to soon, and they did pick him at the end of 2014.
In the UAE, and he made 87 on debut.
87, that's right. Well, second test, but
commentated him on White Line Wireless, chipping one to short mid-wicket.
I used my favourite 87 stat about, there's
no
more scores.
87.
More scores in the 80s. Every score in the 80s has been dismissed more than 87 for Australia in Test cricket, and he proceeded to hit the next ball to mid-wicket, which sounded funny at the time. And
it was. It made it on. It was clipped on a lot of our highlight reels at the time. Yes. I've got to say, it was good radio. So, huge partnership. That's the middle of 2014. And then he doesn't really kick on until 2021. He only makes 3 first-class hundreds in that interim. But a lot of that's down to a point in January 2017. You talked about Mitchell Johnson bowling quick and scaring people. That's the season when Mitch Johnson is absolutely bossing it in the Big Bash, when he goes, I'll play a couple of seasons with the Scorchies. And he comes in and absolutely wangs it down. I think that final he conceded 13 runs off his 4 overs. I don't have it in front of me, but that sounds about right. Like, it was something like 2 runs off his first 3 overs. He was just unhittable somehow in the Big Bash that season. And one of those deliveries, with the pace on that delivery, just doesn't nestle neatly in the gloves of Sam Whiteman, who, it's just a bit off. It just flicks his finger the wrong way, and he doesn't really think much of it. And he goes and bats in the second innings. He makes 40-odd, and they win the game easily because they're only chasing a small score. But then after the game, he finds out his finger's screwed. He's got a fracture. It ends up being one of those really complicated, nasty ones. He has a couple of surgeries. It's very Tim Payne energy. And he ends up going to Tim Payne's surgeon in the end to finally try to get it fixed. So by the time he bats again, it's 2019, I reckon, by the time he gets back for a hit for WA. And he can't kick wicket anymore because he's got this finger that's a liability if anything happens to it. So he has to turn himself into a steady opening bat. And he is steady. He's got 4 seasons in Australia and 1 in England for Northants, where he makes 500 plus runs, sometimes 600, 700, averages 30s or 40s, which is kind of enough in the current day and age to get you, you're in contention if you're making those sort of returns. You don't need Matthew Elliott style 1,400 runs at 70 to be in contention, but he's 32 years old, so it's probably passed him by at national level. So I was thinking this is easily it. It's got to be it. And then I realised that Shield final happened after the pledge came in. So It's not it, which is annoying. But
I was about to load up and tell you all about other Sam Whiteman stuff, but you know what? Forget it. Move on.
104 Western Australian wickets for Ron Gaunt, who was a fast bowler, handsome-looking fella in his photos, not gaunt at all, nice full sort of face. He played in Durban in 1958 in a test match, played at the Oval in 61 and played at Adelaide against South Africa in 64. So he played 3 tests, 3 different years, 3 different series. Never got to experience a win. He took a wicket in his first over. So that's sort of not quite Arthur Conningham areas, not first ball, but his first over in tests. But it kind of didn't get any better from there. 7 test wickets and 6 test runs in 3 matches, played in 2 draws and a heavy defeat, that last one against South Africa at Adelaide, that saw them draw the series and end up drawing it 1-1. Moved to Victoria partway through his career, ended up as a bowling coach to Dodders, Tony Doddermaid and Merv Hughes and so on. So it could be him, but I don't know. The Ron Gaunt doesn't feel that compelling. I thought, who's made 104 at a ground in Perth? Could it be related to that? No Western Australians. Lou Vincent and Marnus Labuschagne in test matches. Jacques Callis and Dean Jones in one-day cricket. And then I just had a little brainwave. I thought, what about cumulative runs? Can I find a Western Australian? In one-day cricket, who should it be but the subject of a previous Michael Fallon pledge? Adam Voges made 104 one-day international runs at the Western Australian Cricket Association ground. He made 24 very slowly as Australia dragged their way to a chase of 213, the final word number, against Pakistan in 2010. The old blokes, Shahid Afridi and Shoaib Malik, were taking the wickets. Hussey and Horrocks got them their 8 wickets down. And then a year later, Voges was the star of the show. He made 80 not out from 72 against England, the final game of a 7-match series. Where's the 7-match ODI series? Bring back the 7-match ODI series. Don't bring back the 7-match ODI series. Australia won at 6-1 in that last game when it was pretty important to them to save some amount of face after the Ashes beating earlier that summer, Voges 80. So it means he took 104. He made 104 wickets at the WACA. It's probably not going to be the answer for Michael, but I've given you some Western Australian value for money nonetheless.
6-1. That's the scoreline that matters most.
That's the reminds me of that's the real Ashes.
I was reminded of the. I now feel profound guilt about whenever I see like fuckwits teeing off about moral Ashes stuff. Now, I'm like, that's our fault, Jeff. Like not just you and me, but we are a big part of it. Whenever we see certain pundits or certain clickbaity websites going really long on moral Ashes, that's our fault. That's our fault. Might be one of the worst things you and I have done in cricket. It's not just you and me. There were other shit posters as well. I acknowledge that it was an online shit posting thing, which was very funny.
Yeah,
and had a good vibe to it. And then we ruined it. We didn't mean for it to get ruined, but then it got ruined. Now every time,
I think I blame Dan Leadbeater personally, primarily. You know, I think he was the ringleader, the instigator of all this stuff. I don't know if that's borne out by the facts. This is just a feelings thing. But just on feelings, I think for the number of shitposty jokes that Leadbeater's made over the years, I think he bears responsibility for creating the culture, for fostering the culture that allowed that to thrive.
It was just such a fun time. As we were there in the UK in 23, that was, and everyone was in on it, and everyone was laughing at the same joke. And then it went 10,000 miles south of there to Australia, and it was misunderstood, and it has been continually misunderstood, and it is now just boorish and annoying. Anyway, I don't know why I felt the need to say that at the end of the show. On a positive note, I have to go and present a PowerPoint, which is titled, Rach just sent me through an updated version for me. Thank you for doing that. Cricket, why it's a fun game to play and talk about by me to a bunch of 5-year-old kids. That's happening at Winnie School in about 20 minutes' time.
How are your PowerPoint skills? Are they any good?
Rach has got good Canva skills, and thus we did it together on the sofa last night. By that I mean I said, do that here and do that there, and she very kindly assembled it for me. But cricket, it could be the headline of our show today. Cricket, why it's a fun game to play and talk about. I'll leave that for your consideration, Jeff.
I had to explain today to a writer I'm helping with a project who asked me what's really the difference between a colon and a semicolon, and I was like, look, it's more vibes than anything else. And the way I was eventually able to describe it was a semicolon is for a poetry book, a colon is for a PowerPoint presentation. You know,
that'll do.
That's how they feel to me.
Semicolon when you want to extend the sentence, when the sentence just isn't done and a dash won't do it.
Semicolon for two not correlative but tangentially connected clauses is sort of more strictly. But I was like, on vibes, I'm like, one's waffly, one's staunch. A colon is like, we are about to tell you a list of things, or we have a very clear dependent clause that's going to follow from this clause. It's martial, it's militaristic.
I've got
semicolons. Scarf. It's like a gauzy scarf. It's a light breeze.
I had some text to go with this yesterday, and Rachel's like, what's the point? I can't read. I'm like, oh yeah, well they can a little bit, but like, it's just headings now. It's like, what is cricket? Who plays cricket? Why do I like cricket? When did I start playing cricket? When can you start playing cricket? That's when I'm going to recruit them all to play All Stars in the summer. What do I do? What is a journalist? What is a commentator? Thank you. And that will be the presentation. Then I'm going to dial them into the desk back in Melbourne, and they can pretend they're on the radio. It'll be fun. It'll be nice.
Give it 10 years and you'll have them all playing in the ODB team against like some side from mid-Lancashire who you've had an email from someone who listened to the show who's asked you to come up.
Whatever it takes. All these games, we're coming into the season. I had a cricket dream last night where Mike Gadding dropped a catch off me. It's pretty unfair that I'm dreaming of dropping the catch off me, considering he took two absolute blinders at Leeds in 81. But I'm still, I guess I'm thinking about the thing that happened later.
Possibly the easiest catch in the history of Test cricket.
And that was doing the rounds on the internet the other day. So that's probably why it was in my subconscious. But we were playing for MCC together and he dropped the catch off me and I'm like, oh, Mike, please. Not in these games. In other games, fine. Not in these games. My stats matter in these games until I'm admitted as a member. They really matter. Anyway, I better go and do that thing. This has been Storytime 217. It's been fun. I hope you've enjoyed it. Patreon.com/thefinalword. Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Thank you to them. Lord's Taverners. Come on the 4th of March if you can in the UK. It'd be lovely to see you all. And run the half marathon, run the 10K, in May. Jump on, do it. Why not? Come and find us. Jeff's there. I'll be there. It's going to be great. And most importantly, enjoy your weekends. Bye-bye.
That's it. See ya.